Next time.
All right, let's talk about this Vasyl Lomachenko-Miguel Marriaga fight last night. Because a lot of us sometimes we get guilty of this. We put high, lofty expectations on a fighter, and he's in there with somebody who is supposed to be levels below, and we expect so much. We expect him to dispatch that opponent and look flawless, almost like a video game or an action movie. Obviously, that wasn't the case last night. I mean, Vasyl Lomachenko did win every round, and he did stop Marriaga in 7 rounds. But because he's under the microscope, from a lot of fans, and we expect him to be, among the best fighters in the world today, or that's what's been mentioned about him. So we tend to look at him a little bit more closely than we would just an average fighter. So let's talk about this fight last night. Now, obviously, he won every round, like I said, did what he was supposed to do. But let's critique his performance a little bit, because Teddy Atlas made a great point last night. When he was assessing some of the habits of Vasyl Lomachenko before the fight started. They were showing some video footage of him. And as we all know, Vasyl Lomachenko does use the ring a lot, does a lot of movement. Not really a subtle movement type guy, a la Floyd Mayweather, a la Mikey Garcia, a la Andre Ward. When they're in the pocket, they tend to use a lot of head and shoulder movements, bending and dipping and ducking at the waist. I'm not saying Lomachenko doesn't do that, but for the most part, his legs are his defense. He's more of an ambush, in and out type fighter, similar to Manny Pacquiao, how he used to go in and out a lot, and still does go in and out a lot, but in his heyday did it a lot more effectively than he does now. So let's talk about what Teddy Atlas said. Vasyl Lomachenko does like to, step off to the side. Changes the look a lot, changes the range, likes to carry himself out of range and basically revs up the attack, darts back in, and really tries to, put himself in positions where, he can see his opponent and kind of get a feel for what his opponent's doing. And then he collects that data and then goes right in and attacks. But one thing that he does do is, when he steps off to the side a lot, he will come back to the center. And he does that somewhat habitually. So it's something that he does. He's more or less a pattern type fighter, just like Manny Pacquiao was. I mean, you could pick up on a lot of the things that Manny Pacquiao did. He would, a lot of times, he would move to his left. And when he moved to his left, he would stop, give you that pump fake, and then shoot the left hand. What Vasyl Lomachenko likes to do is he likes to step off to his right and kind of get you to follow him over there, and then as you're following him, he goes back to his left, and then kind of sets up shop, like in the middle of the pocket there. And the difference between what he does and what Manny Pacquiao does is Vasyl Lomachenko will move off to the side, but he always comes back into the middle, and that's when he punches. Whereas Manny Pacquiao, a lot of times he would step off, but he would attack from an angle instead of bringing himself back to the middle. So he did that a lot against Marriaga, and Marriaga at points was, landing a right hand occasionally here and there. Was landing some shots here and there. It's not like Vasyl Lomachenko, went unscathed in this fight. He was definitely catching a little bit of shots here and there. Nothing that really could stop him in his tracks. Marriaga, again, skill levels below, but still a solid guy, still a guy who knows how to fight. And also, when he had Marriaga up against the ropes, he would try to pitter pat and shoe shine him instead of mixing in a hard shot to kind of freeze Marriaga in his tracks. So Marriaga was allowed to dip and duck underneath shots. He was getting under a lot of those little non-significant blows, that shoe shining, that little pitter pat amateur type punches that Lomachenko was throwing. And Lomachenko, in those instances, I think if he really threw a hard body shot or really threw a hard hook, in succession with those pity-pat punches, I think if he sat down a little bit more, I think he could have stopped Marriaga in his tracks. I guess the perception in this fight was that he was playing around with Marriaga, that he was allowing, Marriaga to hang around in there. And even Tim Bradley during the telecast said, he should have got him out of there. He should have closed the show. but it's hard to really overly criticize someone if they won every round and they stop their opponent in 7 rounds. But again, because the expectations are so high, they're so lofty, this was supposed to be a wham bam thank you man type fight, and it really wasn't that. But again, there are some little flaws. Again, like I said, Lomachenko, his legs are his defense, so there's not a lot of subtle movement. It's not like he's just going to stand in the pocket and give you that little twist of the head, twist of the shoulders, twist of the hips. He's not going to give you that little duck here, little head movement there, little head movement there, little dip and ducking at the waist, little subtle things like some of these other fighters do, as I mentioned. He tends to has to carry his whole body out of range. So there's a lot of excessive movement. There's a lot of accentuated movement. There's no subtle movement. And I think because of that, there's so much energy that he uses with this movement that more often than not, it takes away from him sitting down and throwing power shots when he needs to throw power shots. So it's a lot of that amateur style that is still in his game, where he's looking to just land those pity pat powder puff type little tap punches, instead of really, if he was to set up shop in the pocket and try to work on little subtle moves instead of using those excessive movements, using a lot of the ring. I think he focuses a lot on that type of movement, and because of that, I think there's less energy for him to really throw power shots and sit down on these power shots. So I think he still has that amateur mentality. And people talk about him versus Mikey Garcia, and when I look at that fight, it seems to me like that fight would more or less play out like a Juan Manuel Marquez versus Manny Pacquiao, with Vasyl Lomachenko being the Manny Pacquiao, but with significantly less power. I mean, Manny Pacquiao had that left hand that could get anyone's attention. I'm not saying that Lomachenko, can't hit someone with a punch they don't see and get their attention, but he doesn't have that, stop you in your tracks type power that Manny Pacquiao does. And Mikey Garcia, again, like Juan Manuel Marquez, has that timing. He's a counter puncher, but he's also a guy that can set up and create openings more so than Marquez did. I'm not saying that he's a better fighter than Marquez, but he has a different approach to his counter punching, where, like I said earlier in my other videos, he will touch you and give you that little tap, get you to react to his jab, and then on the turn of a dime, he'll change up the rhythm of that jab, and he'll lull you into thinking that he's just going to be giving you that tap, and then he'll step in with a power jab, and sometimes he'll hook off it, or sometimes he'll just throw the quick 1-2. So he always keeps you guessing. He always keeps you moving your hands as an opponent, and gets you to react into certain things, and he can open you up that way. Whereas Marquez, he could still do a little bit of that, but for the most part, he liked to wait and wait for you to make the mistake and lay back a little bit. Where Mikey Garcia sometimes can step forward, give you that little tap. But the beautiful thing is he's always mixing a hard shot in there to kind of keep you honest and get your attention. So because Mikey Garcia is so good at collecting that data and picking up the habits and mannerisms of his opponent and seeing those tells, I think he could pick up on a lot of the movement that Vasyl Lomachenko does. I mean, it's, you can sit there and look at someone from the outside looking in and formulate an opinion on that. But Mikey Garcia is really, really good at, really seeing and paying attention to what his opponent does and picking up on that stuff. And I think he'll pick up on, how Lomachenko likes to step out and then come right back into the middle, and that's when he's throwing the punches, as opposed to stepping out and then coming off, at an angle, or maybe taking a half step forward and trying to, fight at a distance. Lomachenko seems to me to be most effective in the mid-range, just like Manny Pacquiao. So I think Garcia would be able to pick up on that. He'll be able to pick up on the patterns, because, like I said, Vasyl Lomachenko tends to somewhat do the same thing, with his movement. He likes to step off to his right, and then he likes to come back to the middle. I mean, I was just really looking for that. When Teddy Atlas said that, I said, let me watch him a little bit, real closely, to see, what he's doing, and he does that quite often. And then when he's in there, a lot of times when his opponent's shelling up, he's sitting there just tapping, which is fine, because you want to get your opponent to, move his hands a little bit so you can create that opening. But I don't think he's really sitting down and mixing in a hard shot every now and then when he really needs to. I'm not saying he didn't throw any power shots to you know against Marriaga, but I think that he really didn't make a concerted effort to really get him out of there. This was more or less him trying to play around and just land shots, whereas the guy was shelling up on you. It wasn't like there was a lot coming back at you. That's the opportunity to really go in there and say, you know what, I'm going to get this guy out of there, as opposed to trying to like have that amateur mentality where I'm just going to tap, tap, tap and keep scoring points if this guy's not going to throw anything back at me. I don't know if people want to suggest that maybe he was carrying Marriaga. I don't know. But all in all, this was a good performance, but it wasn't an overwhelmingly exciting performance. It wasn't one of those performances where you say, wow, Lomachenko is he's getting better. He could give this guy problems. He could give that guy problems. So more or less, this didn't really hurt, but it didn't necessarily help either. This was more or less a stalemate. If you're a Lomachenko fan, I'm sure you're going to sit there and say, oh, well, he did what he had to do. He stopped the guy who won every round. You got the sense that he could have done more. That Marriaga was allowed to hang around a little bit longer than he should have. I mean, 7 rounds is still a long fight, but I mean, this guy was basically in survival mode, Marriaga, after the 2nd round. You could see that, he could do. But even with that being said, he was still picking up on the attack patterns of Lomachenko, because again, I think he's a pattern type fighter like Manny Pacquiao. He's maybe a little bit more versatile than Manny Pacquiao, whereas he doesn't do the same thing over and over again. But there are points in the fight do the same thing over and over again a couple times in a row. It's not like he's constantly changing up the look. He does change up the look, but I don't think he consistently changes up the look like a Garcia, who's always giving you a different look. It's really hard to gauge what Garcia does. Garcia may not have all that flashiness that Lomachenko has, but there's a method to his madness. He can get a lot out of a little. Just the little side steps that he takes, the little head and shoulder feints, the constantly changing up the speed and rhythm of his punches, the way he knows how to vary up that jab. I mean, you will see an extensive punch selection from Lomachenko, but there's not a lot of varying up of the speed. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of what Lomachenko does, it's from athleticism. And obviously the guy has talent. But I think, Mikey Garcia is just a little bit more sophisticated in his approach to the sport. Whereas Lomachenko, believe me, he knows how to fight, and he does things very well, and he can create good punching range for himself, and he's good at gauging range, and he's good at really dissecting his opponent as well. He can find the openings as well. But I think Mikey Garcia is a little bit better, a little bit more precise and sharp and accurate with his punches, whereas Lomachenko a lot of times is not really landing flush shots. He's just looking to touch, and he'll throw that shoe shine a lot, and I think an opponent can pick up on that. They can sit there and say, well, he's gonna sit there and give me that little shoe shine, that little ba-da-da-da-da-da. But there's not much else after that. I think in a lot of instances in this fight, Marriaga was getting underneath a lot of those shots. He was starting to pick up on it. He'll come in with the jab, and then he's just like 1, 2, 3, 4. You know what I mean? It's like jab 1, 2, 3, 4. So a lot of it is repetitive, but it's still hard to pick up on if you can't gauge the speed and you can't time it. And Mikey Garcia, I think, is a lot more sophisticated than a lot of Lomachenko's opponents, and I think he would be able to gauge that and pick up on the attack patterns and the combination and and basically the sequences of Lomachenko's punches. Whereas a lot of other guys, they're just not able to pick up on that because they don't have the athleticism. They're kind of overwhelmed by Lomachenko's speed, whereas Mikey Garcia, he's really good at anticipating movement, engaging speed, and his timing is impeccable. So I think that Mikey Garcia would beat Lomachenko. You know, Guillermo Rigondeaux is another guy who's really good at gauging, gauging his opponent's attack patterns and picking up on rhythms and picking up on mannerisms. He's a guy who doesn't use a lot of excessive movement. He's a guy that can just stand right in front of you and be slippery. And you're going to have to throw punches against him to try to open him up. And that's where I think, that fight could be interesting with Lomachenko. I think that the size would be a problem, but Rigondeaux has some pop. He's got that sneaky power. So, Marriaga was able to land some good overhand rights, against Lomachenko. It's hard for me to not imagine that Rigondeaux won't be able to land some of those sneaky punches as well. So, all in all, this was a decent performance. It wasn't one of those dynamic performances, one of those performances where you're like, wow, this wasn't a wow type performance. But I think Lomachenko did what he had to do against the guy who did the best he could in Marriaga. But this was a guy, K47, going up against a 38 special. We all knew what the result was going to be. But the thing is, did Lomachenko show us anything more that's going to make us say, okay, he could beat this guy, that guy, and that guy? I'm going to say no, because this was just basically a sparring session. And, Lomachenko did get hit a little bit more than I thought he would. I know you don't want to, put too much stock into facial damage, but Marriaga is not a hard puncher. So in order for him to really be able to mark someone's face up, you would have to think that he was landing a good amount of punches to do so. And again, like I thought as I said, I hate to be redundant, but I think Lomachenko, when he moves off to his right and then comes back to the middle, I think people can time that, and he's open for the right hand when he does that, because he's moving, and then as he's moving back, his hands are down by his chest a lot when he's moving to the center. It's not like he's keeping his hands up while he's doing that. And in those instances, you can get him to walk into the right hand. And Mikey Garcia has a guided missile for a right hand, and he has a very hard right hand. So it's hard for me to not imagine Mikey Garcia not being able to land that right hand against Lomachenko. Could land that right hand against Lomachenko. So it is what it is. Was I impressed? Not overly. Am I going to be overly critical? I'm going to be somewhat critical because of the lofty expectations that are thrust upon Lomachenko. But there's still a lot to do in order for him to establish himself, in my opinion, as being a superstar in this sport, being the man in this sport. Because a lot of people are already, saying he's the best fighter in the world right now. And again, I'm not a pound for pound guy, but I still think it's a little bit too early for that. And I think that based off of this performance, I don't think there was anything that we could gather from this performance that I think we didn't already know about Lomachenko. Whereas against Mikey Garcia in his last fight, he answered a lot of questions. People wanted to know, even though a lot of people favored him to win, people were still curious. Would Broner be able to hit him and hurt him? Would he be able to control Broner? Would Broner be able to use his supposed size advantage? And would he be able to impose his will on Mikey Garcia? And Mikey Garcia, went up in weight, and he basically walked down the bigger man, and did so in impressive fashion. So I find it quite ironic that Lomachenko wasn't impressed with Mikey Garcia's performance against Adrian Broner when he himself criticized his own performance against Marriaga, saying that, I could have done better on my defense. And I don't care, what anyone wants to say. I think that Adrian Broner is a better fighter than Miguel Marriaga. So, in retrospect, I think Mikey Garcia's performance over Adrian Broner was much more impressive than Vasyl Lomachenko's performance over Miguel Marriaga. So I kind of find that ironic that Lomachenko criticized Mikey Garcia's performance and then, turned in a performance like this. And at the end of the fight, even criticized himself. So basically admitted that he needs a little bit of work to do too. So let me know what you guys think. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pro Lomachenko guys, and there's probably going to be a lot of guys against Lomachenko. There's going to be a lot of Guillermo Rigondeaux fans leaving comments to this video as well. Would I favor Lomachenko over Guillermo Rigondeaux? I would, because I think that the size would be a problem, because I think Lomachenko may have some success if he uses a little bit of range. I think that Rigondeaux hasn't really fought top level guys recently. I think he's been inactive. If you told me who would win this fight maybe a year or two ago, I would unequivocally say Rigondeaux. But now there's some question marks. So right now, I would slightly favor Lomachenko against Rigondeaux, but that would not be an open and shut case. That would be a fight that Rigondeaux could definitely win. He definitely has a chance to win. But right now, I would favor Lomachenko because of the size and because of just him being a little bit more active. And you can criticize his opposition, but in recent years, I think he's still fighting better guys than Rigondeaux's fought. And Rigondeaux's getting older too. So I would fight for Lomachenko because of those factors. But like I said 2 years ago, I would pick Rigondeaux to win the fight. But as I said, let me know what you guys think. We're going to talk about this later today on the Ringside Reporter podcast, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Until then, talk to you guys soon, and peace out, baby.